You have seen this object 1,000 times, on your grandmother's wall, on a colleague's keychain, on a greetings card that says good luck, in a jewelry shop as a pendant, in a souvenir store as a fridge magnet, in home decor shops as a decorative piece for a few dollars. A horseshoe. You thought you knew what it was, a symbol of luck, a folk tradition, something people hang above their door because that is what has always been done. You knew nothing. Because behind this bent piece of metal stands a history that does not begin with luck. It begins with fear. A very specific, very dark fear of creatures that came in the night, stealing children, driving people to madness, destroying livestock and harvests. And the only thing that stopped them was iron. Today we go to where this all began. From medieval villages where the blacksmith was more feared than the priest, to one specific night when a single man shod the devil himself and extracted a promise from him. This is not a legend. This is the story of a real person with a real name and a real date. And by the end, you will look at the horseshoe above your door, or above your neighbor's door, with completely different eyes. Let us start with the last time you saw a horseshoe. Most likely it was a shop, or someone else's home, or a photograph online. And you thought, right, a horseshoe, good luck, I get it, and moved on. But here's a question nobody asks. Why a horseshoe? Out of all the objects in the world, why this particular piece of metal? Why not a hammer? Not a nail? Not any other piece of iron? The answer to that question does not begin with the horseshoe. It begins with iron. Iron was a revolutionary material, not in the modern sense of the Industrial Revolution, but in a magical, almost religious sense. Before people learned to produce iron on a large scale, it was rare and precious. So rare that the earliest iron objects found in ancient burials are made from meteoric iron, literally fallen from the sky, iron from the heavens, the metal of the gods. And when people learned to smelt it from ore, this was perceived as the mastering of something supernatural. A blacksmith who could take rock and transform it into a weapon was not simply a craftsman. He was a person who knew a secret, who worked with fire and metal, two things that were simultaneously creative and destructive. In the Celtic tradition, the blacksmith occupied a special place in the village hierarchy. Above him were only the druids. Because the blacksmith worked at the boundary between worlds, between the ordinary and the supernatural, he knew how to tame fire. He knew how to transform earth into metal. These were forms of knowledge inaccessible to ordinary people. And the iron he created possessed a special property. It repelled creatures from the other world. Fairies, the Sidhe, elves. The names differ across traditions, but the essence is the same. Beings that live alongside humans but in a parallel space, that can cause harm, that steal children and leave changelings in their place, that drive people mad, ruin livestock, bring disease. And the only thing that stopped them was iron. Why iron specifically? There are several theories. One of the most convincing is historical. When peoples armed with iron weapons conquered peoples who had only bronze, it looked like magic. Iron defeated bronze so effortlessly that the victors seemed like supernatural beings. And gradually in folk memory, a connection was forged. Iron is what enemies fear. Iron is what protects. Another theory is practical. Iron tools and weapons protected against real threats: wolves, bandits, wild animals. In a medieval village, a person with an iron knife was safe where a person without one was not. Safety became associated with the metal. But in the popular consciousness, these two theories merged into one. Iron protects against everything. Against humans and against the non-human.
Against the visible and the invisible.
And so you live in a medieval village. You have a home, a family, livestock. You know that beings from the other world can come in the night. You know that iron stops them. What do? You hang iron above the door. But which iron exactly? This is where things get most interesting. Because a horseshoe is not simply iron. It is iron that is passed through a special place, through a forge, through the hands of a person who knows the secret of metal. A horseshoe has passed through fire, through the hammer, through water for tempering. It carries within it all the magic of the blacksmithing process. And it has a shape, the shape of a crescent. A shape that in dozens of traditions is associated with protection, with cycles, with the boundary between worlds. And it has been on a horse, an animal that in Celtic tradition also held a special status, the animal of the gods, a creature between worlds. A horseshoe is a concentration of protective magic, iron plus fire plus the crescent shape plus the connection to the horse. 4 layers of protection in a single object. This is why a horseshoe specifically, not a hammer, not a nail, specifically this. And this is why it was hung above the door, above the entrance, above the point where the protected space of the home ends and the outside world begins, above the boundary. But this is only the first layer of the story, because next comes a character who makes all of this concrete and alive. A character with a name, a date, and a story that contemporaries wrote down. His name was Dunstan. And one night the devil came to his forge. Dunstan. If you live in England, you know this name. If not, you are about to. Because this is one of the most interesting people of the 10th century. And the story that comes with him is one of those stories that sounds like a legend, but has a real foundation beneath it. Dunstan was born around 909 in Somerset, England. He was a monk, then abbot of Glastonbury Monastery, then Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest ecclesiastical position in England. He was an advisor to several kings, a reformer of the church, and a man who had enormous influence over the politics of the country. But before all of that, he was a blacksmith. More precisely, he practiced blacksmithing as one of his monastic crafts. In the Middle Ages, monks mastered various crafts. It was part of monastery life. Dunstan worked with metal. He had a forge, and one night a visitor came to him. The story is recorded in several medieval sources with minor variations. Here is its essence. Late one night, a stranger came to Dunstan's forge. He asked to have a horse shod, or in another version, he asked for horseshoes to be made. Dunstan looked at the stranger and saw something others would not have noticed: hooves. Beneath the stranger's clothing were not human feet, but hooves. Dunstan understood who stood before him, but he did not run. He did not begin to pray. He did something else entirely. He agreed. He took red-hot tongs, and instead of shoeing a horse, he seized the devil by the nose. He pressed the burning metal to his face and held it there until the devil howled in pain and promised everything Dunstan demanded. And what Dunstan demanded was one thing, one single thing: never to enter a home where a horseshoe hangs above the door. The devil promised. Dunstan let go. This is where the tradition comes from. Not from abstract folk superstition, but from a specific deal with a specific being that had a specific name. And the terms of that deal were precise. The horseshoe must hang above the door. Above the entrance specifically, right there. Now, a few words about why this story has proven so enduring. Dunstan is a real historical person. He is canonized by the Catholic Church. St. Dunstan's Day is celebrated on the 19th of May. He is the patron saint of blacksmiths, goldsmiths, and locksmiths. His biographies were written by contemporaries, including a monk named Osborne who lived only a few decades after Dunstan's death. The story of the devil and the tongs is recorded in these biographies, not as a fairy tale, as a fact of the saint's life. A medieval person reading this drew one conclusion: if the Archbishop of Canterbury himself extracted such a promise from the devil, then a horseshoe above the door is not a folk superstition. It is a contract, a legally binding contract with a being who signed it. This explains why the tradition spread so quickly and so widely. This is not simply something that is said to help. There is a specific promise. There is a specific witness. There is a specific condition. Hang a horseshoe above the door, and the devil will not enter, because he promised. Now, the question you are almost certainly already asking yourself: if the condition is that specific, why then does the argument exist about how to hang a horseshoe? Points up or points down? The answer to that question is in the next part, and it is more interesting than you might think. Because behind each position stands its own logic, its own tradition, its own fear. But first, something more about the blacksmith. Because the story of Dunstan is not the only story about a blacksmith and the supernatural. It is part of a much wider tradition that existed long before Christianity. In Greek mythology, the blacksmith of the gods is Hephaestus, lame, cast out, living in his forge beneath the earth or beneath a volcano, not on Olympus with the other gods, but apart, at the boundary. In the Norse tradition, Volander, the greatest of craftsmen. Taken prisoner by a king, he works on an island, cut off from the world, between humans and gods. In the Celtic tradition, the god Goivnu, the blacksmith who makes weapons for the gods and brews the ale that grants immortality. In every tradition, the same structure. The blacksmith does not live where ordinary people live. He is at the edge, at the boundary. He knows what others do not know. He works with fire and metal, two things that simultaneously create and destroy. And this is precisely why an object from his hands is special. A horseshoe is not simply metal. It is metal that is passed through the hands of a person who stands between worlds. In medieval Europe, this image of the blacksmith as magical intermediary survived, simply repackaged in a Christian form. Dunstan, a monk and a blacksmith, a man of God who works with metal, a man who knows how to deal with the devil because he knows both that world and this one. He seized the devil with red-hot tongs, the tool of his craft. Not with a cross, not with prayer, with a tool. This is a very important detail, because it says, protection from dark forces is not only prayer, it is knowledge, it is skill, it is a specific action with a specific object. And the specific object that emerged from this story, the horseshoe, became the carrier of all that power. But here is what happened next. As the tradition spread, from Britain across all of Europe and then across the world through colonization and migration, it began to split in two. Because people who passed the tradition on to one another did not always pass on the complete story. They passed on the object and the general rule, a horseshoe above the door protects. But the details were lost. And in those details lay the central question, points up or points down? And around this question, a war broke out that has been going on for several centuries. Points up or points down? This argument is older than most countries on the map of the world, and it has still not been resolved. Go to any comment section under any post about a horseshoe, and you will find two armies, each absolutely convinced that their version is correct. Some say, points up. The horseshoe as a bowl. Luck accumulates inside and cannot spill out. Others say, points down. Luck pours out onto everyone who enters the home. Both camps sound convincing, both camps have their own logic, and both camps are right because they are talking about different things. Let us start with points up. This is the older tradition. It comes directly from the story of Dunstan and from the Celtic and British tradition as a whole. The logic is this. The horseshoe is a vessel. When the points face upward, it forms the letter U, an open bowl. Into this bowl, luck, protection, and the well-being of the home are gathered. They cannot flow out, they accumulate. But there is a darker version of this logic. Remember the story of Dunstan? He extracted a promise from the devil never to enter where a horseshoe hangs. A horseshoe with points up is a trap. If the devil or an evil spirit attempts to enter regardless, it falls into the trap. It ends up inside the bowl. It is caught. Points up is not simply the accumulation of luck. It is a snare for dark forces. Now points down. This tradition appeared later, and it has a different geography. It is stronger in southern Europe, in Spain, in Italy, in Catholic countries where the tradition passed through a different kind of filtering. The logic of points down is the logic of flow rather than accumulation. Luck should not stagnate, it should move, pour downward onto everyone who enters the home, onto everyone who lives there, onto everyone who passes by. This is a different philosophy, not preservation but distribution, not a trap but a fountain. And this version also has a dark layer. In some traditions, points down means the horseshoe is actively directing its power, not waiting passively but working, sending its protective energy downward, beneath the threshold, into the earth where, according to folk belief, the boundary runs between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The threshold is a boundary. A horseshoe above the threshold with points down is an active defense of that boundary. Two approaches, two philosophies, two different fears at the root of each. The first fear, luck will leave, so keep it inside, points up. The second fear, protection will be passive and insufficient, so direct it actively, points down. And here is what is interesting. Both traditions did not arise by chance. They reflect two different relationships to the world that have existed in human psychology since ancient times. Some people believe that good things must be guarded and protected, gathered, accumulated, kept from leaking away. Points up is the psychology of preservation. Other people believe that good things multiply when you give them away, that luck which flows is living luck, and luck which stagnates goes sour. Points down is the psychology of flow. This is not simply an argument about a horseshoe. These are two fundamental ways of looking at life. Now about the geography of this argument, because if you look at a map, it is very clear. Britain, Ireland, Scandinavia, points up. These are countries where the tradition came directly from Celtic and Norse roots, where the story of Dunstan was alive, where the horseshoe was understood primarily as protection against fairies and dark creatures. Spain, Italy, southern France, points down. Countries where the tradition passed through Catholic reinterpretation, where the emphasis shifted from protection against darkness to attraction of light. And in America, complete chaos, because everyone came to America. The Irish with their points up, the Italians with their points down, the Spanish, the British, the Scandinavians, and they all ended up in the same space, each with their own tradition and complete certainty that their version was the correct one. This is precisely why the argument still rages in comment sections today. But there is something that unites both traditions, something that nobody argues about, and this is the most important thing of all: the location. The horseshoe is hung above the door, not on a window, not on a wall inside the home, not in a bedroom, above the front door, above the threshold. This is the one point on which all traditions, all cultures, all versions of this ritual agree absolutely. Why? Because the door is a boundary. In the folk beliefs of virtually every culture in the world, the threshold of a home is not simply an architectural element. It is a boundary between worlds, between the safe interior space and the dangerous world outside, between the world of the living and everything beyond its edge. This is precisely why so many superstitions are connected to the threshold. You must not greet someone across a threshold. You must not pass objects across a threshold. You must not stand on a threshold. You must not return across a threshold if you have forgotten something. The threshold is the place where one thing ends and another begins. The place where the protection of the home still works, but only just. The most vulnerable point. And the horseshoe is hung precisely here, at the most vulnerable point, to close the gap. Iron above the boundary. The devil promised not to enter. Fairies fear the metal. Dark forces are stopped right here, at the threshold. Shape, material, location, all of it deliberate, all of it meaningful. Meaning that accumulated over thousands of years, from fear, from experience, from stories that people passed on to one another. And now we return to where we began. A fridge magnet, a keychain in a pocket, a pendant around a neck. You are holding an object with 1,000 years of history. An object that appeared as a response to a specific fear. Fear of creatures that come in the night. An object that passed through the hands of blacksmiths, people standing between worlds. An object consecrated by a specific deal, a promise given by the devil to a man holding red-hot tongs. You bought it in a souvenir shop for a few dollars, without any understanding of what exactly you were holding. And here is the most interesting thing of all. This does not make it less significant, it makes it more significant. Because 1,000 years of collective memory has not disappeared. It simply repackaged itself into a form that modern people can accept without fear. A magnet, a keychain, a piece of jewelry, a decorative object. The form changed, the essence did not. Behind every horseshoe, above every door, stands the same question that people have been asking for 1,000 years. How do I protect what I love from what I cannot see and cannot understand? The answer has changed. Iron, fire, the blacksmith, Dunstan, points up, points down. But the question is the same, and it has not gone anywhere. You are asking it too, just in different words. Now the final question I want to leave you with. You know the whole story. The Celtic fear of fairies, iron as protection, Dunstan and the red-hot tongs, the devil who made a promise, the war between points up and points down. Will you still hang a horseshoe above your door? I think you will. Not because you believe in the devil or in fairies, but because a horseshoe above the door is a gesture that says, I am protecting this home. I am protecting those who live in it. I am drawing a line. This gesture is understood without words. It is understood across 1,000 years. It is understood in every language. Iron above the threshold. The boundary is closed. If this video shifted something in the way you see ordinary objects around you, hit like, because there are many such objects in your world. Each one has its own story. Dark, strange, and at the end, almost always, about you. In the next video, we are taking apart something you do several times a day without thinking. A gesture that exists in every culture in the world, but nowhere means exactly the same thing. Crossed fingers. You think it is about luck. In reality, it is about two people, a pagan ritual, and Christianity that reversed its meaning into the complete opposite. See you there.